old man of the water, the tree that remembers everything and forgives nothing. The Ahuhuit stands where it has always stood, where it will always stand, its roots drinking from the cenotes' black throat. Abuela says the tree remembers when the Spanish came. She says it remembers before that, when the gods still walked and the water ran red with offerings. She says forgiveness is a luxury afforded only to those who forget, and the tree forgets nothing. I believe her because I have seen the old man. They found Tio Miguel 3 days after he disappeared. His body floated face down in the cenote, palms pressed against the limestone as if in prayer. The water had turned his skin the color of tallow, wrinkled and soft. But it was his eyes that made even the priest cross himself wide open, unblinking, filled with roots, not floating roots, growing roots, thin white filaments that wound through his pupils like embroidery thread, anchoring him to something below, something that refused to let him close his eyes even in death. El Viejo del Agua took him, Abuela said, and spat 3 times over her left shoulder. The police called it suicide. A man driven mad by debt, by the weight of living. They didn't mention the scratches on the cenote's edge, fingernails torn and bloody, or the way Miguel's mouth was stretched too wide, jaw dislocated, as if he'd been screaming underwater for hours. Mama forbade talk of the old man. Superstition, she said, her rosary beads clicking like teeth. But at night, I heard her whispering prayers that weren't Catholic, words in Nahuatl that tasted of smoke and flowers. The old tongue that remembers what Spanish tried to bury. I first saw the old man when I was 7, the summer the drought came and the maize died in the fields. Papa lost his temper more often that year. His fists found Mama's face, my back, the walls that would never hold our secrets. I learned to make myself small, to become a shadow that men's eyes slid past. One night, after Papa had drunk enough mezcal to drown his conscience, I ran. My feet knew the path to the cenote, even in darkness. The Ahuhuit rose against the stars, a giant whose branches remembered when this land was forest, not wound. I pressed my forehead against its bark and wept. The bark was rough, ancient, warm despite the night's chill. I whispered my hatred into Ithatrid for my father, for God who let this happen, for myself for being too small to stop it. That's when I heard the voice. Not heard, felt. It came from below, from the water, from the root place where darkness drinks. It spoke in syllables that predated Spanish, that predated Nahuatl, sounds that were the rain's first word and the river's last confession. I looked down into the cenote. He stood in the water, though stood is the wrong word. He was the water, or the water had agreed to hold his shape for a moment. His skin was the color of old pennies, green with age and minerals. His hair floated around his head like riverweed, moving in currents I couldn't see. His eyes were black agates, ancient and patient. In one hand, he held a branch Ahuhuit. I knew without asking, torn from the tree's heart centuries ago. In the other, he held something that writhed and bled light, something that screamed without making sound. "Little root," he said, and his voice was the cenote speaking. "Little wounded root, you call to me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My bruises throbbed in time with the thing in his hand, that bleeding, screaming thing. Do you know what this is?" He raised the bleeding light. A memory. 53 years old. A woman who drowned herself here after her husband's fists made a stranger of her face. The tree drank her in. I keep her here, alive in water, dying forever. She begged for mercy. His smile had too many teeth. The tree remembers. I do not forget. This is how justice grows. I ran. Abuela told me the story properly the next morning, her hands steady as she braided my hair. Her fingers found the tender spot where Papa had struck me, and she hummed something low and dangerous. "El Viejo del Agua is older than the conquest," she said, "older than the pyramids. He was here when this land was underwater, when all of us swam in the womb of gods. The Ahuhuit is his witness, his memory keeper. Every violence done near the water, the tree records. Every sin unpaid. Why doesn't he take Papa?" I asked. Her hands stilled. "Because the old man doesn't take. He waits. He is patient as stone, patient as water. Your father will come to the cenote. They always do. The guilty ones. Something calls them. What happens then?" She resumed braiding, each pull sharp enough to hurt. Then the tree decides. Forgiveness or memory. And the tree, Mija, forgives nothing. The drought broke the same week Papa started sleepwalking. Mama would find him by the door at dawn, mud on his feet, water in his hair. He'd stare at us with eyes that didn't quite focus, and beneath the mescal stink, I smelled cenote water mineral, and old and patient. "Bad dreams," he'd say, but his hands shook when he said it. I knew. I'd seen the memories following him. They walked behind him like loyal dogs. The shadow of Mama's split lip, the echo of my 8-year-old scream, the ghost of his mother, whom he'd left to die alone while he drank in Guadalajara. The Ahuhuit remembered everything, and its remembering had teeth. He lasted 3 weeks. They found him at the cenote's edge, his hands bloody from clawing at the limestone. His eyes were open, threaded with roots so thick they split his pupils like fault lines. But unlike Tio Miguel, my father was still breathing, still screaming. They took him to the hospital in Merida. The doctors called it a psychotic break, prescribed pills that turned him into furniture. But I saw Abuela at his bedside, placing copal resin under his pillow, whispering to the roots that had made homes in his eyes. "What does he see?" I asked her. "Everything," she said. "The tree makes him remember. Every blow he struck, every tear he caused. He relives it from the other side. He feels what we felt. Forever. Will he die? Eventually. Years from now. Decades, maybe. The old man is patient." She placed a hand on my head, and I felt the weight of generations in it. This is mercy, Mija. Quick death is forgiveness. Memory is the price. I am 40 now. My father died last year, finally. His eyes still open, still rooted. I have not returned to the cenote since I was 17, since the night I brought my own pain to the water's edge and begged the old man to take it from me. He rose from the black water, unchanged, eternal. The bleeding light in his hand was my father's memory, screaming itself hoarse. "Little root," he said, all grown. "Take it," I begged. "Take the memory. Take the pain. I want to forget." He smiled his too many toothed smile. The tree remembers. I do not forget. But you, little root, you can choose. Carry the wound, or let me carry it for you. But know this, I keep what I am given. I preserve it. Your pain will live forever in my keeping, screaming, bleeding light. Is this what you want? I looked at the thing in his hand, my father, trapped in eternal remembering. I thought of Tio Miguel, eyes full of roots. I thought of the woman from 53 years ago, still drowning. I thought of Abuela's words. Forgiveness is a luxury afforded only to those who forget. "No," I whispered, "let me keep it." The old man's eyes gleamed. Wise little root. The wounded ones who choose to remember, they grow strong. They grow deep. They become trees themselves. He sank back into the water. As he disappeared, he spoke one last time. When you are ready to forgive, return. But know that forgiveness means letting go of justice. The tree will not judge him then. Only you can. I live in Mexico City now, far from the cenote, far from the ahuhuit that drinks and remembers. But sometimes, in the rain, I smell mineral water. I hear syllables older than Spanish, older than pain. My daughter asks me why I flinch when her father raises his voice, why I check the locks 3 times, why I will not learn to swim. I do not tell her about the old man of the water. I do not tell her about the tree that remembers everything and forgives nothing. I do not tell her that memory is a root that grows in darkness, that sometimes the only way to survive is to let it. But I think she knows. She has her great-grandmother's eyes. Sometimes I catch her whispering to the plants in our apartment, speaking words in a tongue I never taught her, a language that tastes of smoke and flowers and water that remembers. Last week, she brought me a cutting from a tree in the park. It spoke to me, she said. It said we're related. I held the branch and felt it pulse. Ahuhuit. Impossibly, here in the city, 1,000 miles from the cenote. The bark was warm, ancient, patient. We planted it in the courtyard. It grows faster than it should, drinks deeper than seems possible. At night, I hear water moving beneath our building, feel currents I can't see. My daughter sleeps with her hand against the window, fingers touching the glass, reaching toward the tree. I watch her dream, and in her dreams, I see an old man rising from water that isn't there, holding something that bleeds light and screams without sound. Little root, I hear him say, though the words come from my daughter's mouth. All grown, the tree remembers. It has found me again. It will never let me forget. And I think I don't want it to. They say in the old stories that trees are the first memory, the first witness. They say water is the blood of the earth, the keeper of secrets. They say the old gods did not die. When the Spanish came, they went down into the cenotes, into the roots, waiting for someone to remember, waiting for someone to call their names. Last night, my daughter and I went to the courtyard. The ahuhuit had grown taller, its roots cracking the concrete, reaching for water that flows in arteries beneath the city. She placed her small hand on the trunk. It wants to show me something, she said. I knelt beside her, placed my hand next to hers. The bark was warm, pulsing. And then I saw it not with my eyes, but with something older, something that had been sleeping in my blood since Abuela first told me the stories. I saw the cenote, black and bottomless. I saw the old man rising, his arms full of bleeding lights, memories that screamed and bled and refused to die. I saw my father among them, and Tio Miguel, and the woman from 53 years ago, and others, hundreds of others, all the way back to when the Spanish first came with their crosses and their swords. And I saw something else. Behind the old man, in the deepest part of the water, something larger stirred. Something with 1,000 eyes and 1,000 mouths. Something made of roots and memory, and rage so old it had calcified into stone. The tree, not the tree in the courtyard, not the ahuhuit by the cenote. The tree, the first tree, the one that remembered when the world was water, when the first blood spilled, when the first scream echoed across creation. It saw me, and it spoke. Little root, it said, and its voice was every drop of water that had ever fallen, every root that had ever grown. You have carried the wound. You have chosen memory over forgetting. Now choose again. Will you forgive? I looked at my father's screaming light. I looked at all the screaming lights, all the unforgiving memories. I thought of Abuela's words. Forgiveness is a luxury afforded only to those who forget. But I thought, too, of my daughter's hand in mine. I thought of the root growing in my chest, the one that had kept me alive through everything. I thought of how roots can strangle, but they can also anchor. They can also feed. I remember, I said, I will always remember. But the tree waited, patient as stone, patient as water. I release him, I whispered. Not because he deserves it, not because I forget, but because I will not let his violence root in my daughter's soil. I will not let him grow there. The tree was silent for a long moment. Then, one by one, the screaming lights began to dim. Not vanishing, the tree never forgot, would never forget, but quieting, settling into memory rather than torment. My father's light flickered once, twice, and went still. For the first time in decades, I saw his face, not the monster of my childhood, not the screaming thing in the water, but just a man. Broken, sorry, gone. You have learned the secret, the tree said. Memory is not forgiveness. Forgiveness is not forgetting. They are separate roots from the same seed. You can water both, or neither, or choose which one grows toward light. The vision faded. I opened my eyes. My daughter was staring at me, tears on her cheeks. You let him go, she whispered. Yes. Do you still remember? I touched the Ahuhuit's bark. Warm, ancient, patient, always. The tree makes sure of that. But now the memory bleed. It just is. She nodded, understanding beyond her years. In her face, I saw Abuela, and Abuela's Abuela, and all the women who had stood at cenotes and chosen what to carry, what to release, what to transform into root and branch and leaf. The Ahuhuit in our courtyard grows still. Birds nest in its branches. Children play beneath its shade. Sometimes, late at night, I see the old man standing beneath it, but he no longer frightens me. He nods, respectful, and returns to the water that flows in hidden channels beneath our feet. The tree remembers everything. It forgives nothing. But forgiveness, I have learned, was never the tree's burden. It was always mine. And memory is not a wound that never heals. It is a root that grows deep, that anchors, that feeds. It is the story we tell our daughters, the song we sing to the water, the prayer we whisper to the trees. It is how we survive. It is how we grow. It is how we remember that we are more than our wounds, more than our father's sins, more than the violence done to us in darkness. We are the Ahuhuit. We are the old man of the water. We are the cenote and the root and the patient rage that calcifies into stone. We are the ones who remember, and we are the ones who choose what grows.